First of all, why don't you just tell me a little bit about how old you were, where you were stationed, and you were drafted, is that correct?
Right.
Okay, and you were how old?
18.
18. And you're from where?
Here in Chattanooga.
Oh, you're from Chattanooga.
Right.
Okay, and so you were drafted into the Army.
Yes.
How soon after basic training or after you'd been in the service were you sent overseas?
Well, I went to training in Fargo, North Dakota. The special training, ASTP, Army Specialized Training as an engineer. That was a program that they had set up that I went to for about 6 months. And then they canceled it when they had the invasion and they were beginning to need infantry troops. And from there I went to Camp Gruber, Oklahoma for more Army training. And I was there for about 6 months. So I went overseas in the end of 1944. And we went into Marseille, France, and we were moving up towards the front when the Battle of the Bulge started. So we didn't know what it was. All of a sudden we were in the middle of the attack of the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge. And that was in December of 44. And we fought in that. And we began to have quite a few casualties, and eventually were pulled back for replacements for about a week. And they sent in replacements, and then we moved back to the front. And
At this time, what did you know was going on with the Holocaust?
I didn't know anything about it. I knew
Hadn't
that.
heard anything about Jews in slave labor camps?
No.
Nothing. You knew nothing about the torture of anybody?
I knew that there were concentration camps. I'd heard a little bit about that, but I didn't know what they were or how many or anything like that.
Did you even know what that term meant, concentration
Not
camp?
really. I thought it was just a big prison. And anyone that resisted Hitler was put in this. But as far as the Jews or anything like that, I had no idea what was going on.
So following the Battle of the Bulge, were you aware by this time that the Third Reich was completely crumbling?
I thought they must be. We, of course, had a lot of fighting during the Bulge, but then we began moving. One of the first cities I remember fighting in was Wurzburg. And we attacked and went all the way through Wurzburg. And I found out later some of the people that I ran into that came after us, they said, I thought you took Wurzburg. And we had fought our way through, and as we were overcoming the Nazis, they would just go down. The place was completely bombed. 9 days before we got there, they were bombing. So there were only walls of buildings standing. And the Germans, when we were overcoming them, would just go down into the basements or in part of the abandoned buildings and let us go through, and then the next Americans that came along, they'd fight again. So it was hard to really, we thought we'd taken the city, but when we overcame the main forces, while the ones that left would just go down and wait and fight again. Then we went to some of the other cities. I'm trying to think. Well, Firth was the airport outside of a big city, Nuremberg. And we fought in the edge of that, but I'd been wounded by that time and went to the hospital for a few days, and then came back. They'd gone past Nuremberg, and they were regrouping to attack again. and we would have fights for a lot of the small towns, which didn't last long. We'd overcome them or capture them or whatever, and then get together and move on to the next. We were headed towards Munich. That was the big city that we were supposed to be going to take over. And on the way, maybe the day before, or I guess the day that we went to Dachau, they said we're being sidetracked to take one of the concentration camps, Dachau. And we didn't really know until we got there what that was.
Tell me a little bit about that day. When was that?
That was April the 29th of 1945. And
what was the first thing you saw?
well, the first thing I knew about the camp was quite a distance before we got there, you could smell the odor from the crematory. And that was a horrible thing. It almost felt like you couldn't breathe.
What did you know it to be?
Well, we figured out that it was burned bodies. I mean, it was obviously a crematory. And that made us even more worried about what we were going to see ahead of us. And when we finally could see the camp, just outside the camp were 40 boxcars of bodies. That these were people that had been on these boxcars for maybe 10 days. As the Americans were advancing, the Germans were trying to move the prisoners. And they had this train of 40 cars loaded with prisoners. And they were on there so long, well, 10 days without food or water. And the ones that were weaker died along the way. And when they got to the camp, the German guards threw open the doors and machine gunned anyone that was still alive. And so when we got there, the doors had been opened, of course, and the bodies spilled out on the pavement. And of course, the ones that had died were still in the cars. And we had to walk past all of that. Then we could really realize what we were getting into. When we got to the main gate, the guards had fled, gone inside or wherever, but there were still these huge German Shepherd dogs chained on each side of the gate, just going crazy trying to get at us. So we shot them and went in the camp. And as we got inside, my lieutenant told me there was down to the right was an opening. Well, there was the outside concrete wall around the camp, maybe 12 feet high. And then 15 or 20 feet inside that was a wire fence that had been electrically charged. And there was a dry moat inside that. So anyone trying to escape would have to go down in that moat, and then they'd hit this electrically charged fence, which of course would kill them. And then there were towers every so often all the way around with guards with machine guns looking down on the camp at all times. So the lieutenant told me to go down between these two, the wire fence and the high wall, and said, don't let anyone out, because they've got to be examined by the doctors and they're in terrible condition. And he took the rest of the men and went inside looking for any of the guards that would have escaped into the camp.
What were you thinking by this point? You were obviously seeing that these were not...
Well, as I got inside
fighters.
between these two, between the wire fence and the wall, lined up maybe 50, 75 feet inside, there was a long row of naked corpses that were waiting to be sent to the crematory. And alongside them were all these prisoners just standing there with, well, amazement on their face, shock. They didn't know really what was going on, I guess. And they were just maybe a couple of hundred of them where I was, standing there looking at me. And as I walked in, first I had to walk around the body of I don't know whether it'd been a prisoner or a guard, but the man had been beaten to death and very bloody, and his eye was laying out on his cheek. And I walked past him, and then looking at all these poor prisoners, most of them looked like they were almost starved to death. And just had a terrible look on their faces of what's going on, what's going to happen next. And I think they realized that we were Americans, that we were liberating them. But as I walked along looking at them, one man left and ran over and grabbed something up off the ground and started running with it. Well, 3 more started chasing him, and they knocked him down and were trying to see what he had in his hands, kicking him and hitting him.
These are inmates?
Pardon?
These were inmates?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, these poor people have been driven insane, and I thought they were going to kill this man. And I started to fire over their heads, but there were barracks all behind them, and I knew if I fired in there, I might hit somebody in the barracks. So I didn't know what to do, and I thought, this is what hell is like, with all the way these people look, there's dead bodies, they're beating this poor man to death, and I was just overcome with everything. And I looked up at the sky and said, God, get me out of this place. And when I looked back down, there was a man coming from this group over to the fence where I was. And he said in German, do you have a cigarette? Well, I had about 3 packs, but I had seen them fighting over nothing, and I thought if I bring out the cigarettes and all these people stand here, I don't have enough to give them, and I'll have a riot on my hands. So I said, no, I don't have any. And he said, un momento, 1 minute. And he ran off behind the barracks, and I didn't know what was going to happen, but shortly he came back, and he put his hand through the there was openings in the wire, and handed me this little rusty can, and inside was a cigarette butt about 1 inch long, water stained, and looked like he had dug it up out of the ground. And I felt this was the biggest treasure this poor man has. And he said, this is in thanks for liberating us. Well, tears came to my eyes, and I couldn't thank him enough. And I made a big show of putting it in my pocket to save. And he turned around and went back to the fence. So, to where the other men were. And I started patrolling back and forth. But at that moment, everything completely changed from horror to making me feel like, I'm really doing something good. Being part of the liberation of these people. And I completely had a different attitude about everything. And after thinking about this, which I have for ever since 50-some years, I've become to realize that that was God's answer to my prayer. He had that man give me that, and it just totally changed my feeling of despair at seeing all this to feeling of joy that I was really doing something to help these people. And that later on I was relieved. Someone else took up the post, and we went inside. I went into the camp, and we had food brought in for us and for the people that were capable. I heard about some of them that were given food that they were so starved that they ate too much and died from it. And but that night I slept in the barracks where the guards had been, and I laid in the bunk with a blanket that had been pulled back and the pillow was still wrinkled and everything from the guard that had slept there the night before. And I laid there in that bunk thinking, what kind of a man was it that slept here last night? And that's the way I went to sleep, thinking of what this man must have been that was part of treating these people like that. Well, then the next day, we got up and loaded up to go towards Munich to take the city of Munich. Someone else had moved in to take over the camp. But we rode tanks into Munich and didn't get into the fierce fighting that I anticipated. The people were just overjoyed, really, to see us come and know that Hitler was finished. And I heard later that was the 30th was the day Hitler committed suicide. But the people in Munich, there was a little fighting and you could hear gunfire going on around, but most of the people were out in the city, on the streets, handing us bottles of wine and champagne and throwing flowers on us, and they were totally overjoyed to have the end of the Nazi rule.
How were you feeling by this time?
Well, I was very happy too. That it seemed like the fighting was just about to cease. We did go on a little bit further. Well, for the war hadn't completely ended, so we took a few more little towns, and we were on the border of the Brenner Pass, close to the Brenner Pass, about 30 miles. And I was accidentally shot. And when I was taken to the hospital and operated on, the next day when I was coming out of the operation, a man in the bed next to me said the war's over. So that was a big relief.
How about coming home?
Well, I stayed in Europe until this was May, I think. So I didn't get sent home until I was released from the Army in March. We took up, well, one thing I did was we went to prison camp. Well, of course, like I said, I was in the hospital for 60 days, being recovered from the gunshot wound. And then I went to Linz, Austria, and about 6 of us lived in the camp with the German prisoners, and the rest guarded the camp. And my job was to, when we needed supplies for the prisoners or needed any taken to the hospital or things like that, I would go with my gun, my rifle, and go with the truck to pick up supplies and things like that. But while I was in the camp, we would, well, they had a barber shop, and I remember going into the barber shop with German prisoners running it. Mm-hmm. And I was lying there in a chair getting a shave, and it hit me all of a sudden. This guy had a straight razor, and I thought 3 months ago I was probably shooting at this guy, and here I am letting him shave me with a
With a
razor,
straight
he could
razor.
cut my throat if he wanted to. But we had no problem at all with the prisoners. I think they were happy to get the war over too.
How have you felt about that day since then? Have you suffered from
You mean
lot
a
of anger?
concentration camp?
the day you went in there? How do you cope with that today?
Well, for years I wouldn't think about it. Didn't talk about it. I don't think I even told my parents what I had seen. And then finally I began thinking, it would always come back to me, but I'd just try to put it out of my mind. And I've talked about it. My wife has, I think, gotten sick of hearing about it. I've told her so many times, and my children, but this was all years later. It'll never leave me, and I just try not to think about it too much. It was a horror that you never can completely put out of your mind. So I've tried to tell people about it for the reason to try to avoid anything like that ever happening again.
What do you say to Holocaust deniers?
Well, it's on the 50th anniversary. About 75 of us from the Rainbow Division went back to Munich and to Dachau. And I've got in there some of the experiences, but we went in groups of 4 or 5. There were about maybe 3 or 4 of us groups like that went to high schools and a group of people that were getting ready to go to university and talked to them about this. And one fellow got up and said, "Would you believe that my grandmother lived in Dachau, and she said this didn't happen?" Well, we of course were amazed at anything like that. And this German boy said, "I've tried to convince her, but said she just won't accept it." And he said, "There are people here in Germany that still say that. And I cannot possibly believe that anybody that's at all sensible, with all that the army after the war, they had camps like this, Auschwitz and Dachau, and all of them opened up, that the people could go through and see themselves what happened. And the pictures and everything, it's impossible for me to believe anyone could think that. I don't know how in the world, with all the publicity and everything that went on, how they could deny it.
What would you say now to someone wanting to understand what happened? What would you say? How do you explain the inhumanity and the evil?
I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how people could do that. We ran into SS troops that I know were they were guarding these camps, and a lot of times when we were fighting, we would find out that there would be a few SS that were making the ordinary German soldier. I mean, it was beginning to be apparent that the war was over. And I know that a lot of these people, these soldiers, didn't want to fight. And these SS men were behind them with machine guns, making them fight. And that's what prolonged the war, was some of these fanatical guys that were were doing the horrible things that were done. I guess part of it was they didn't want the war to stop because they were afraid of what would happen to them when it stopped. And I guess that's why they were. Of course, they were involved in so much of it themselves that I don't think they thought that there was anything wrong with it. That's the only way I could explain it. But how anyone could treat another human being the way they treated them is just beyond reason.
How were you treated when you came back to Tennessee? Now, you said you didn't talk about it. You didn't talk about it with your parents.
Well, it was so good to have it all over with, and everybody was happy to have us return, and they greeted us with open arms. And I'm sure some of them must have seen some of this on TV, but I guess no one really wanted to talk about it much. Figured it was over and let's move on.
Mr. Dorris, thank you very much.
Certainly.
I know this was difficult.
Well, it's heartrending to bring up some of this. I mean, it's still, my wife says sometimes, quit talking about it, it's upsetting you too much. And I know there's something that came up that I was asked to write all of it again. And I got these books. I read a lot of it again, and which brought it all back. And it took a day or two to get over it. And she's told me, just quit talking about it, which I know is probably right.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Sure.
And it's been a pleasure. I'm
Well,
gonna direct you over to Bob. He's going to take your picture.
sure.
Let me de-mic you. Hold on one second.